Does Russia have NATO in its sights? The Polish Prime Minister says he doesn't want to scare anyone, but that the threat is real.
Poland is preparing very intensively for various scenarios. I have no intention of scaring anyone, but the coming months, not least because of the somewhat changing nature of the war in Ukraine, could prove truly critical. These concerns are particularly palpable in the Baltic states. Let us not be afraid. We are preparing for various situations, but we must not underestimate the threat. So we remain vigilant. I can reiterate, we are aware of the threats, also thanks to information from our allies.
All right, now I'm wondering what he means when he talks about various situations. I'm going to ask a Russian foreign policy expert about that in just a moment. What we do know is that the US has issued several warnings to Warsaw about a Russian plot to attack Poland. Now, you can see on this map where Poland is, bordering Ukraine, also bordering Kaliningrad, directly north of Warsaw. Now, Kaliningrad is a Russian enclave. That means Russian territory. Now, the Baltic states, so Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia, which you can see in the top half of the map, they have all long said that they are also worried about being vulnerable to a Russian attack. And the possibility of a Russian provocation is now being reported widely, as you can see here in all of these headlines. What we also know is that Russia's president is feeling pressure because of Ukraine's drone campaign against Russia. Ukrainian attacks have been disrupting Russian supply lines and causing a real headache for Vladimir Putin. He even admitted earlier this week that his country is facing fuel shortages because of Ukrainian attacks. You can see pictures here of people in Moscow waiting at petrol stations, trying to fill up their cars and getting annoyed. So the question right now is, with Russia's advance in Ukraine stalling, is President Putin looking for alternative strategies, like attacking NATO member states, to break the deadlock and change the dynamics of the war in his favour? And does that mean NATO member states are facing a concrete risk of war with Russia? All right, we are going to put that and several other questions to Kirill Shamiev. He is an expert in Russian foreign policy, a researcher at Vilnius University and an analyst at the Swedish Institute of International Affairs. Thank you so much for talking to us about this. Now, we just heard there from the Polish Prime Minister. He has clearly warned about critical months ahead in the face of a Russian threat. Does he mean that Russia is actually preparing to widen its war and to take it to NATO member states?
First of all, thanks for having me. The short answer to your question would be is that indeed the tide of the war has shifted not in Russia's favor in Ukraine, but at the same time there is a very weak strategic position for Russia's escalation against NATO member states. According to all Russia's military documents, any attack on NATO would likely mean a nuclear war. Therefore, any kinetic strike, official kinetic strike, or let alone the land invasion again in NATO territory, would mean a regional or potentially international war with potential use of nuclear weapons. And so far, I have not seen Russian preparations for this scenario. At the same time, I must say that, of course, Russia looks at Europe as an adversary. It views European politicians, European military-industrial complex as basically as a rear of Ukrainian military effort. And of course, they develop scenarios for destabilizing European politics, both including, through information manipulation and interference, but also through sabotage and other, let's say, below this threshold, the threshold of kinetic attack measures.
Okay. The German Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, says that he takes the threat from Russia very seriously. Let's just take a listen to what he said, and I'll come right back to you.
Diese Bedrohung
This threat on NATO's eastern flank is not abstract. Rather, it is very real, the one we are discussing here, and it is palpable. Russia is constantly violating the airspace of NATO member states. Russia is carrying out hybrid attacks on the internet. Russia is destroying undersea cables in the Baltic Sea. Moscow is testing how united and resolute NATO is.
So a threat that's real and palpable, he's saying there. So just a question about the intelligence. The intelligence around this is credible.
If you look at the wording of that intelligence assessment, that Russia can escalate through various hybrid means, and this is, of course, credible. But what it means, like hybrid means, it starts from, just some kind of social media propaganda to actual Russian agents and saboteurs blowing up military-industrial facilities in Europe. So the range of potential Russian activity is huge, and we've seen, as Bundeskanzler just said, a whole set of Russia's measures against Europe. And in my assessment, of course, Russia will be continuing these measures as long as Russia's war against Ukraine is in its active phase. But again, when it comes to the specific, this nightmare scenario of a land invasion of NATO member states, I think we should rather ask whether Europe has enough deterrent potential and how to demonstrate it to the Russian leadership that if Russia actually decides to do this, they will not achieve absolutely anything, and it will be only counterproductive, not only to its war against Ukraine, but also potentially to the future of the Russian regime.
Okay, so let's just specifically talk again about what these various scenarios that we heard Donald Tusk talking about earlier, that he said Poland was preparing for. So what you're saying, these scenarios would be hybrid attacks like missiles and drones, as opposed to a land invasion. I just want to clarify that. In my assessment, at the worst case scenario, of course, it can be missiles and drones that Russia would officially claim were kind of rerouted, for example, by the Ukrainian electronic warfare, or maybe there's some kind of a malfunction. But at the same time, there were other very serious threats against European security that stand below these strikes against European territories. Now, this is already happening. But the land invasion itself is, of course, a way more serious effort. And moreover, if we look at the history of post-Soviet Russia's invasions in other states in the former Soviet space, there was also a set of preparatory actions that we've seen. This comes from, say, intensification of domestic propaganda in order to prepare, the society for the radicalization of Russia's foreign policy. There's, of course, propaganda in the states themselves. Then this is the mobilization of the pro-Russian or maybe kind of anti-European, anti-globalist marginal groups in these member states that ideally, of course, so that they can destabilize domestic politics before the actual Russian invasion. So, and at this stage, there are some worrying signs, but there is still time. We need more time to actually see this happen. And of course, I hope this is we won't see these signs in action. Okay, but of course we're talking about this. We've seen the headlines about this. So how do you think people, for example, in Poland, will be reacting to all of this? I mean, is this creating a level of anxiety that's stronger than in past years?
When it comes to Poland, I think Poland is a rising star of European security. It's going to be, when it comes to the threats stemming from Russia, Polish military development is showing very positive signs. Poland invests a lot of its GDP into its military development. It's just naturally the size of its population and the territorial size is significant. But what I am concerned about is the potential status of the Baltic states. We've seen already that a drone that hit a Latvian apparently defunct refinery led to the change of government in the country. There were also flyovers of Russian drones over Vilnius, Lithuanian capital, that landed exactly on the military training facility. So these are, of course, very small nations with a population of around 2 million people, with the tiny, again, naturally tiny armies, and they are the most vulnerable, especially Estonia and Latvia that are bordering the so-called like mainland, right, Russia's territory. And on the other side of Estonian and Latvian borders, there are significant Russian infantry forces that are at the same time fully busy in Ukraine currently.
Can we talk about the timing of all of this? Why, in your opinion, is this happening right now?
In my view, there are several reasons for this. On the one hand, Russia is struggling to achieve even its limited objectives in Ukraine. Despite what Putin says about successes on the battlefield, still the Russian military is losing a lot of equipment and personnel trying to occupy these remaining towns in the Donbas region. Secondly, the Russian economy in this year has not only stopped growing, but it's faced recession. Ukrainian strikes against oil refineries and the general negative trends in the global economy reduces demand for Russia's oil and hence Russia's budgetary revenues. And the general population in this year, specifically Russian population, shows signs of war fatigue and desire to sign a deal to make the war come to its end. So this combination of domestic, economic, and foreign policy factors lead to quite an unsatisfactory situation for Vladimir Putin personally. The simple question that ordinary layman in Russia can ask: so, what was it for? We struggle so much. Like if you put yourself in the shoes of these people, some can even say, we supported the war at the beginning, we supported the president at the beginning again, but nothing was achieved. And of course, for an authoritarian leader as Vladimir Putin, this is a very serious question, because if ordinary people are starting asking these questions, the elites are, of course, already discussing, what's going to happen in the future and what they need to do to prevent even further degradation of their own personal lives within the country.
And of course, there's the huge number of Russian soldiers who are dying because of the war in Ukraine, and that's obviously having an effect as well, I'm sure.
There is a huge number of Russian soldiers dying in Ukraine, but unfortunately, I must say that Russia still has, in terms of the sheer immoral potential to mobilize more people. My research, I did the specific research on Russia's mobilization potential. They invested a lot in terms of developing smart, quote unquote, smart regulations that enables the Russian government to sometimes even single out and mobilize specific individuals from specific social groups into the military. And you know why they have done it? To limit the potential social backlash if there is a need for another mobilization. So instead of this mass mobilization, like old school 20th century, what we've seen in 2022, now the Russian government is capable of, say, Ivan Ivanov from Moscow will be mobilized, and Sergei Ivanov from Kostroma, from this specific street, will be mobilized as well, but other people will not be mobilized because, let's say, they are business owners. There are some other factors that they should not be taking into the army. So the Kremlin is learning, they are adapting, and they have the tools to mobilize further. The question is whether the political leadership decides to do so.
A quick question about Russia's aims. It is not, given what you've said about how it's being affected by these 4 years of war, it is not looking for an all-out conflict with NATO states. Would you say it is sending a warning signal?
Oh, absolutely. Russia has been sending warning signals since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Some of them were successful, especially the nuclear blackmailing, especially vis-a-vis the United States. There were several high-profile meetings between Russian and American officials on these topics, and also during Biden administration, one can make an argument that it helped to limit the quantity and quality of the U.S. support for Ukraine. And of course, all this Russian rhetoric as well, including domestically, they understand that Europeans and Americans read this, translate and read this as well. So these are all signals, an attempt to shift, if not the Western leaders' policy towards Russia, but at least the public opinion in these states. So this is a multi-scale, of course, operation that is existential for Russia, and they use all the possible instruments to share the public opinion in its favor. And at the same time, at this period of time, this summer, the Ukrainians, in my view, have an upper hand in terms of the public relations campaign.
One last question to you about the role of the US and whether there's been a lot of talk about it, whether the US is a reliable partner for NATO. Do you think Vladimir Putin is looking at the unease in NATO, given Donald Trump's ongoing criticism of the alliance, and is thinking, well, this might be the perfect time to test how strong NATO is?
On the one hand, Russia is, of course, very happy with Donald Trump's rather, adversarial relations or conflictual relationship with other NATO member states, right? Russia is looking forward to U.S. withdrawal of at least some of its forces from Europe. This will, of course, favor the balance of power in Russia's favor. At the same time, Donald Trump has repeatedly demonstrated that he is quite an unpredictable leader, and he can change his opinion relatively quickly. At the same time, there is a feeling that there are few people in Washington who can actually influence and understand what Donald Trump will be doing. So on the one hand, yes, it's a positive development for Russia, but on the other hand, well, President Trump has demonstrated repeatedly that he can quickly change his course and do something that the others have not predicted so far.
Kirill Shamiev from the Swedish Institute of International Affairs. Kirill, thank you so much for your insights. It's been great talking to you.
Thank you for having me.
So, is Russia getting ready to test NATO? Is the alliance ready to respond? Let us know in the comments and subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time.